Hello, this is Gonzalo Lira speaking to you live, and this is the Roundtable, episode number 13. And it is a real pleasure to welcome two people whom I've gotten to know as of late, who are just absolutely lovely. And we're going to be talking about some very interesting things insofar as sanctions, how the sanctions have backfired, and how the Dutch farmers in particular are protesting, and all kinds of interesting things insofar as the reaction to the sanctions. So, with me today is Joost Niemoller. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Joost.
Yeah, okay, it's okay. Actually, it's Joost, but everybody calls me Joost, and so that's fine.
Oh, please tell us the correct pronunciation so
Well,
that we know.
it's maybe not for you, but it's Joost with double
Oh,
O.
yeah.
So,
Okay.
but Joost is okay. I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Joost. I'm so sorry. Joost Niemoller, he is a dissident journalist. He is a canceled journalist, and we'll talk about how he was canceled. That sounds very interesting. And so, Joost, thank you so much for coming on. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, same to me.
And there's Fiorella Isabel, who is a journalist, and now she is in Moscow. She is starving to death because of the sanctions, because there's no food, and the people are just scavenging for food wheresoever they can in Moscow. And don't be fooled by the very nice apartment that I see behind you. That's your place, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is
it's
my
really,
my film room.
yeah, it's really lovely. Thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having
So,
me.
my pleasure. So tell me about the life in Moscow under the regime of the sanctions.
Right. So I came to Moscow and I wasn't expecting it to be what the West has said, that everything is falling apart, that people are still in breadlines, that they picture it like the USSR, like they still have this idea. A lot of people think, Putin is a crazy communist. That's what I mean. A lot of people are just so misinformed, especially in the West, about what Russia is. And I come and the subways, the metro is beautiful. It's like a museum. There is literally no trash in the streets. There's no homelessness. Everything is very efficient from the moment I got to the airport to the moment I used public transportation to just the way things are done. Now, there is a lot of bureaucracy, which is part of the Soviet era. But in terms of like the cleanliness and the efficiency and the restaurants and just like the plethora of life in the streets, people walking, people going on picnics, enjoying the summer because they know winter is coming. But winter is coming more so for the EU than it is for Russia, because here, I think in September, automatically the gas switches on and it's very, very cheap. And you just have heating everywhere. In Europe, they're already telling people to scavenge for firewood or take cold showers. So, I mean, right now, I see a lot of people I know sort of moving over here. And I find that really interesting because these sanctions are not hurting Russians. In fact, the sanctions hurt me the most when I came here, and it hurt several of my colleagues because I thought that I could at least use some of my cards because I was told MasterCard and Visa worked, but they only work for the Russian type of cards, not for us. So I wasn't able to use any of my cards. And luckily I had cash. And I tell people, like, you have to bring enough cash because until you have a bank card, you can't do anything here. And it's not the Russians doing this. It's the United States' sanctions. And it's just, that's been the hardest part, is figuring out how to get money into my American bank accounts or vice versa. And other than that, like, once you live here and you have a bank card and you have things situated, it's very nice. I have to say, it's honestly, I mean, just compared to a New York City subway station where there's rats, there's just complete poverty, to Moscow, it's night and day.
Yeah, well, Moscow is famous for its subways. I mean, and that's one of the things that but everybody's been saying for decades, that they're the most beautiful. And I've seen pictures. I've never been there myself. I can say also that Kharkov here in Ukraine, the subways are each very different and distinct. Some of them are very pretty. Some of them are a little dull, perhaps, but there's an effort. An effort was made, and it's light years from the New York subway. But the thing I'm curious about is, how is the day-to-day living insofar as sanctions are concerned in Moscow? I mean, do you see any effect whatsoever in your day-to-day, in food shopping, in any aspect whatsoever?
Not really. I mean, if you're a person that had like an independent business or if you had a lot of merchandise that was, you know, American, it could be a problem in terms of like retail, like Victoria's Secret left, H&M, Zara, a lot of things that a lot of people here like to shop at. They're like, oh, I can't get it anymore. But that's actually opened up the opportunity for Russian brands. This is like kind of funny, like that I started learning about this, like Russian makeup, Korean beauty products, like independent, small Russian like retail people have a chance now. So that's opening up for those people, because the corporate American brands are harder to come by. Yes, some people miss them, but that's only if you're looking for that sort of thing. As far as what you need, you can go to the grocery store. The shelves are full. They don't have a shortage of baby formula. There's not like, there's so many different things that you can get. I mean, I do think like Moscow is definitely not, it's not a super cheap city, and it's not like super expensive either. It's like right there. And things have gone up in price for Americans because our dollar has sunk, right? So like it's good for Russians, but let's say you're getting paid in American dollars, it's not as great because the dollar has dipped down. So that's more of the issue. Like I said, that's affecting the Americans perhaps living in Russia, or the foreigners, maybe people from the EU coming here, more than it is affecting the Russians themselves. And you just see again, people taking taxis, people taking the metro, people walking, people going out and spending money in bars. People just, you can go find like just clean, nice grocery stores. And there's just the delivery aspect too. The food delivery here is so quick and efficient. And the day-to-day life here isn't difficult. I think the most difficult thing for someone like me who thinks it's cold when it's below 60 is going to be that. It's going to be that. But other than that, like I just find life here very simple, very efficient, and people are actually nice. You know, Russians have this reputation of being very, you know, just cold or mean, and the American and the British way of being is, especially the American, I would say, I'm going to speak for Americans. It's just very overtly friendly. You're told to, if you work in hospitality, to be smiley. And that is, I mean, the service industry is unique in the United States because people don't make a wage. They literally get paid on tips. So it's just like, so here it's a little bit different. You know, the way people are is more upfront and more just honest. There's less of a formality. And I can appreciate that as somebody that actually likes that over a lot of the formalities, but that's just me personally. But
also it's a lot easier to deal with somebody if they're upfront and you know exactly where you stand with them. In the United States, the passive aggressive, kind of like always smiling and trying to be friendly, you never know where you're standing with them. They might hate you and you'll never know.
That's exactly it. Yes, that's totally it.
A question I have about the mentality, or not the mentality, the effects of the special military operation or war or invasion or however you want to call it. Is it affecting the day-to-day life of people in Russia?
No, I mean, the only thing I've seen, and this is, you know, this may surprise some people in the West who think that everybody here loves Putin. They don't. A lot of people don't like him. Even people that I work with in a pro-Russian, supposedly a Russia state-affiliated media, don't necessarily all love the government. In fact, they asked me, why are you here right now? What are you doing? Like, this is like, they've asked, you know, our colleagues who are also from the States, like, what made you come here? But the thing is, a lot of people understand the geopolitics. They understand why things are happening. They understand what the US has done. In the United States, it's the opposite. People don't understand anything of what's happening. People don't understand what's going on. And so that reality is completely different. And I think the thing that I've noticed most here from people who are Russian is that they hate this conflict or war. You know, some of them call it war, some of them call it a conflict. I see it as more of a conflict, but they hate that this is happening because a lot of them have family members, a lot of them have friends, a lot of them would go into Ukraine. They see the Ukrainian people as brothers and sisters. They don't see them as enemies. They don't want to continue this. I mean, they loved having been able to travel to Crimea. They loved having to travel to Ukraine and being able to travel to Europe. A lot of people here still hold a positive view about the West. They still think that the United States is this positive place in general, and that's more so culturally what they see in movies and music. They love American music. I've been karaokeing with Russians. It's hilarious. I think they just love this American like type of art, and it's really interesting. You don't see the hatred for Americans, you don't see the hatred for Ukrainians, but you also don't see people being directly affected here, which is something that I think Ukrainians will point out and say, see, well, you're lucky because Russians aren't being, shelled, but they're forgetting about what's going on in the Donbass and what's been going on for the last 8 years. And so that is something that I'd like to point out, is a lot of people here are very, very much, they have so much love for the people of Ukraine, and there's not hate for Americans. There's more of curiosity and intrigue and like, oh wow, this is America. They're still fascinated in a way by the West.
So, okay, I mean, this is really a good and very complete picture that you're painting. Now, the issue of the sanctions, of course, is that they were designed to hurt the Russians, and they haven't hurt the Russians. Instead, they've hurt the Europeans. And here I want to bring in Joost, who can tell us how the sanctions are hurting the Europeans and how the Europeans seem to be shooting themselves in the foot. Or somebody, I forget who it was, said that it's really that the Europeans are shooting themselves through the lungs. Very, very grotesque imagery. I forget, some Hungarian foreign minister I might have said that. It slips my mind who, but it was a famous saying. Just, you're in the Netherlands, and the reason I wanted to bring you on is I wanted you to fill us in about the whole issue of the farmers' protest, because as far as I can tell, and Fiorella, correct me if I'm wrong, nobody in the West is covering the massive work stoppages and protests of the farmers. And I want to know what's going on, and why aren't they being, why isn't this bigger news in the West? Joost, please, what has happened?
Yeah. Well, it's. I was thinking, is there some relation with what we talked about before with Russia and with the farmers? I'm not sure. I think those things are related in a way, but.
But basically, what's going on is that the farmers are on strike, and they're protesting against.
Well, they're not
government.
striking because they cannot strike, because
they're protesting.
Business. So then they strike, they hurt themselves. So the only thing they can do is go on the road with the tractors and do all kind of actions against the government, and they are very. Most of the Dutch people are in favor of them, so they're not against the Dutch people or something, but they're against the government at the moment. That's what's happening at the moment. But the situation in the Netherlands is, because the sanction also getting bad and getting worse, especially when winter comes, but also because the inflation is huge at the moment. So it's getting more and more a problem of the people who are more or less on the poor side of the society. The prices in the shops went up for 20%. That's enormous. When you are, it's difficult to pay your bill at the end of the month, and you cannot. So that's one of the problems we do have here. With the farmers, it's also this problem that they don't get much for the product they made. So, and that goes even worse. So there's also a relationship between that. But what you see here is that it's kind of, it looks like more or less a perfect storm. All kinds of things are coming together which don't have anything to do with each other, and that's what's going on. So we see here a plan about the reason why the farmers are so upset is because there was a plan of the government saying nitrogen is a problem because of the nature. So they have a big plan of how much official nature we would have to have, and the farmers were the problem for that. So we have to lost of half of the farmers in the Netherlands, and they make a map, and on that map you could see all the farmers which has to lose their farm. So they saw the map and they were
So
already angry.
basically, the government basically published a map saying these
Yeah,
farms are going to be what,
right.
expropriated, or they're not going to be allowed to farm, or what
Yeah,
was
so they just say these farms has to sell their farms, has to sell their land to the government. Um,
at a
uh,
fair price, or at a below market value?
well, I mean, they don't have much choice, don't they? There's only
Well, yeah,
one
yeah,
buyer, and that's the government.
yeah. But I mean,
Um,
like, look, I lived in the Netherlands for almost 2 years. I
yeah,
lived in Amsterdam, and the Dutch are salt of the earth people. And what I noticed was that there was a great deal of cooperation between the Dutch. And it seemed that
mhm.
they had a very strong relationship with their government, in the sense that the government was responsive to their needs. Why is it that all of a sudden the government seems to be turning its back on its farmers,
Yeah,
especially considering that
that's
farming is such an important business in the
Mhm.
Netherlands? What happened?
mhm. Well, that's a very good question, and this is also to do with what's behind the war in Ukraine, because
Hmm.
what you see here is this whole um, movement towards more globalization, which is actually a movement toward more American influence, and
Hmm.
they make it look like it's international, but in fact it's all American power behind it. So you
Yeah.
have all these organizations like the World Economic Forum, well, the endless amount of organizations, and they called it freedom and they called it international, and they are working against on an international scale against some of the other big countries which are organizing themselves now, like Russia and China and Brazil, like in the BRIC countries. And now you see for the first time, and India also, and now you see for the first time that those countries, they don't look at America anymore as their friend. They they look as kind of opposition to them, and I don't see American as international freedom anymore. And this globalization, this effect of globalization, is also an effect on the farmers, because of this globalization, you get more migration, you get more people in the. And I'm sorry, but everything has to do with everything, so it's very
Yeah.
complex to
Everything is
say. But
connected. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
everything is connected. So because of the mass immigration, lots of people go to the Netherlands. Oh, it's already full, but it's getting more full every year. Every year there are maybe 1 million extra people coming. Well, that's maybe a bit too much, but in that account, lots of Dutch people are moving away. So you see a change of the people in the Netherlands, and also you see a need for land, and you see a need for where to build new houses. And so you see that a lot of the land in the Netherlands is still owned by the farmers, and there are not so many farmers anymore, because everything is, they don't need many people anymore to do it, and they produce enormous amount of food all the
Hmm.
time. Um, so they look at it and they say, look, we have a lot of empty land, which is not official nature. So and there are not many people, and they're not very good organized anymore. So let's take over the land. I mean, that's what the hidden agenda behind it is, and put more people in it so we can build more houses.
So it's
Um,
basically a land development swindle that the government is perpetrating on the
Right. And when
farmers.
you say things like that, they say, well, you're making these things up because we never say this officially, etc., etc. But a lot of people, and also the farmers, they know that this exactly is what behind this. And the same thing
Because,
is,
by the way, Joost, I heard this. It sounded crazy to me, so I'll tell you what it is, and why it sounds crazy to me, and you tell me if this is accurate or not. There's this
yeah,
crazy idea that what they want to do is that the globalists, call them what you will, want to create a
mhm.
giant megalopolis like across the Netherlands and Belgium, and turn it all into housing.
Right, right. That's the
Is that
call. That's the plan is called a Trias state. It's a plan. I mean, it's not an official government plan, but it's a
Mhm.
plan that they say, and it's going in that direction because everybody knows that. So it will be the end of the Netherlands. It will be the end of Belgium and Germany as we know it. And when you look at the famous map from the university, you look to Europe at night and you see there's a bulb of light somewhere, and that's exactly where this place is. So that is the Netherlands, the west of Belgium, and the western part, North Rhine-Westphalia, the western part of Germany. And this part is the most industrialized, urbanized area of whole of Europe.
Mhm.
And there are almost, like, say, 30 million people living there. And those people who came up with this plan, they say, well, we have to go in competition with the real big cities in the world, like Shanghai. I think Shanghai has something like 20 million people or something. So the Netherlands is too little. We have to work together and to make one city, one enormous city. And they call it tri-state, but maybe a better name is Eurocity or something, the biggest city of Europe. And then go in competition with the world and be one of this whole globalized world. But what you see then is only people with a city-like mentality will stay there. And there will be no conservative farmers or Christian farmers. I mean, they will all go away because there's no place for them. And it will all be kind of woke universum of city-like people. And that's exactly what is actually going on. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's a secret person behind having that plan and say, well, we're going for that. But all the minds on the people with power are going in that direction. So that's why this tri-state is a good example of what's going on.
Because it's not like because when I hear a conspiracy, I always tune out because I don't believe in conspiracies. I think that many people might go in the same direction because it benefits them for different reasons, and so they might all get on board with a particular policy. Are you of the opinion that that's the same thing, that different groups in the European bureaucracy and the European financial centers, they want this because they can get more power, more money, more prestige, more whatever because of this? Is that your opinion?
And people do live. I mean, that's the nature of people. They do live in bubbles. I mean, when you are in this Western, I would say, woke bubble, international globalist woke bubble, you think different than when you are living in. Well, maybe not when you're living in Moscow, but when you're living in somewhere outside of Moscow, or you're living in Africa in a little place, then you have a different way of thinking, and you need to do the same way of thinking to get into power, because other people think, oh, okay, I understand what you're thinking, and I will help you going along. And that's exactly what is going wrong now, because everybody in the Western world, in my idea, do have the idea that everybody else is also thinking on the same way. So they also think people in Russia and China and India and Brazil, they're all kind of Western individual kind of people, and they all want the same democracy, etc. But those societies are organized in a very different way. They have their own history, and that is at this moment the big thing which is going on in the world. And this is also what's going on now here in Ukraine, for example.
And so you think that what's going on is that the Western intelligentsia, the Western leadership class, is in such a bubble that it doesn't realize what it's doing and hurting the rest of the population?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's Fiorella, let me bring in Fiorella on this particular issue. Is this kind of atomization, this bubble living, are you seeing that in Russia, or is there more, like, to put it, I don't know quite how to put it, transverse communication between the different groups in Russia? Because this is something that we've all discussed, that in the West, every group is atomized, and the leadership class is completely detached from the reality on the ground. Do you see something similar in Russia? Or if not, why not? What's the difference, as you see it, at least?
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
It has to do with this, because you talked a lot about Moscow, But there's a big difference, in your opinion, between Moscow and the rest of Russia. In a way of
In my
thinking.
opinion,
Yeah, please.
yeah, there absolutely is. I mean, I've been to St. Petersburg, and I intend to travel more to the rest of the country, but there is definitely a big difference, and that's coming from a lot of Russians themselves. Like, Moscow is the power. The issue many have with Russia is the power is concentrated in Moscow, right? There's not enough of everything out in other cities. Now, they do have other cities that they're industrialized and have a lot of things, but they would like some more decentralization in terms of more equity for other cities. A lot of the outer cities tend to be more pro-Russian, though. Like, a lot of the people that live in other cities and tend to be more, from what I've been told, anti-Western, because they understand more the consequences of what the West has been doing to Russia, how they've been vilifying Russia and smearing Russia. Actually, Moscow is the most, I think I would say, but pro-Western city. Besides St. Petersburg, there's a lot of, cultural, artistic elements there as well. But Moscow's a very capitalist city. It's it's a city that it wants technology, wants modernization. And so but the people here understand they understand the geopolitics of everything way more than the people in the United States, right? They understand the differences. People here have friends who are communists. They have friends who are not communists, and they're friends, and it affects them, but not to the point that it affects us in the United States. For example, with the Trump versus Biden contingent in the United States, everything is extremely divided in the United States. Whereas here, it seems like people can more so live and have these differences and almost kind of make fun of it and just go on about their life. The youth is a lot more pro-West than the older population. Who a lot of times has a very nostalgic look over how things used to be. And that is just what I've observed and what I've been told from talking to actual Russians living here as well. And one of the things also that I wanted to point out is that Moscow itself is just extremely, not, like you said, it's just one area of Russia. It's not a total representation of it. And I think that, when we talk about that has to be put out there as well, because it is always a lot of capital cities, or a lot of cities that have so much industrialization, do tend to be a certain way compared to the outside of it. And I think that's an important element to point out.
Yeah, because I looked it up just now. I had no idea about this figure that Moscow has just shy of 12 million inhabitants, which is roughly 8-9% of the total Russian population. So it's a big chunk, and so of course it's the center of gravity. And I've been reading 19th century Russian novelists since I was a kid, and they all complain that, there's too much power in Moscow. They don't pay attention to the provinces, and this is a perennial complaint. And I come from Chile, and Santiago is the major city, and we have something similar. Everybody says, Santiago gets everything, and we get this crumbs off the table. And so it's the typical, bitching and moaning of countries like that. But the question I'm really interested in, and I'll explain why I'm so interested in this in a moment, is the leadership class of Russia as detached from the regular people as the leadership class of the West? Have you seen that kind of detachment, or are they closer? And if they are closer, why?
I think they're definitely not as detached, because they are they explain to the population, here's what we're doing. For example, even with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, they have breakdowns as to what's going on. Like, they explain flat out, okay, this is how many weapons we have, how many soldiers have died, this is what we're doing. They involve the public in a lot of, just not the media only, but in events. They have a lot of nationalists. I don't necessarily want to say nationalists, but very focused on sovereignty, focused on Russian pride. There's a lot of holidays. There's a lot of things that are celebrated, especially, like I said, with the older population. When you see a lot of the pro-Russian elements of flags, pride, whatever, all of that is, people know about their history. And that's one thing I think the United States lacks in knowledge of their actual history. And in Russia, people know their history because the government ensures that they know their history. The government is always seems to be listening to the concerns of the public, at least more than in the United States. Of course, like I mentioned, people outside of Moscow feel Moscow gets everything. They, a lot of people even in Moscow say we need to, give more to the outer provinces. But that's something that every single country, as you mentioned, has gone through for centuries. And so I don't feel like people like Vladimir Putin and people like, Sergei Lavrov are out of touch with their populations. I feel like they're more in tune with what the populations want. And I see it in terms of the life that people are leading. I don't see people really out there complaining and saying, oh, we want to get rid of Putin. Like, people have their criticisms and they say them, but it's more of like, yes, we could do this, we could do that. It's more localized, actually, the criticisms of certain mayors. They have actually applauded I forget his name, but the most recent mayor of Moscow, who has really just beautified the city, got rid of a lot of trash, put fountains in. People really appreciate that attention paid. And I don't see the like in the United States, you see, for example, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, you see wealth, right? The extreme wealth, and you see extreme poverty, like right next to each other. You don't see that here. You see there is wealth and there are oligarchs. Nobody's saying that there's not oligarchs. Nobody's saying that Russia's 100% free of corruption. But it's this idea that it's equitable to the United States that I think a lot of us have a problem with, because you're talking about a country that has resisted what the Western interventionism, that has defeated the Nazis, and is now once again going towards that route, to fighting this fascism that's coming in. And then you're also talking about a country that's been looked on as being just, a country that has gas and that's it. But there's a lot of culture, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of knowledge here. Most Russians know, for example, more than one language. Even if their American English isn't that great, or their British English isn't that great, they still know more about our politics in the United States than we know about their politics. So I think in order, I think that shows a population that understands history, understands their government, and understands the geopolitics far more. Is there also a sense of just apathy from the youth? Yes. And I think that comes from just this sort of youthful lack of being alive during the times of like the Cold War. And I think that's a danger for any society. When you don't know your history, and when young people don't know their history, I think you have that danger of interventionism. And so I think that is something to look out for, because the youth still holds a very positive view of the West. And I don't blame them, but I think that's a lot of the propaganda. And I think that's why Russia is so heavy on pushing back against the Western propaganda, because they, the West constantly pushes propaganda on them. And so the moment they push back and say, hey, this is propaganda, then there's like, oh, Russia is trying to censor, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, but what do you, this is the reality.
Yeah, Russia is not censoring CNN or not preventing CNN from broadcasting in Russia, but I do believe that RT can't broadcast, or Sputnik can broadcast in the West. So who's really the censor here? Yeah, I have to say that the issue of the leadership class being out of touch with the people, which seems to be happening in the Netherlands, and certainly in the United States and the UK and all the rest of it, is something that I find deeply troubling, and that's why I was focusing on it so much. And so, Fiorella, I guess the answer is you believe, at least from your experience so far, that the Russian leadership is closer to their own people, is paying more attention to them than the leadership class to us.
Yeah, I don't see even out, like, you could say, oh, well, people could be protesting outside of Moscow. Yeah, but you don't see that. Like, you don't really see that as much. You see the youth kind of pushing back against the conservative norms, because again, because Russia is a more conservative country. The gender roles are more conservative. There is more, it's not even that it's religious, but there is like pride in the Orthodox religion, right? There's pride in the churches. There's definitely more conservatism when it comes to the LGBTQ situation, where like people don't really openly aren't as open about their sexuality and stuff. But I don't see what the West says, where there's like persecution. I saw two girls make out in the subway. Nobody batted an eye. I mean, it's definitely more conservative, and there's definitely more tabooness, and there's definitely people that aren't okay with it. I'm not saying there's not, but it's definitely not what the West describes as like they're literally going after people, like, and they're just there's a lot of push towards that, towards the legalization of marijuana. People are not and the younger people are not anti, marijuana. It's just like people are just more under the radar about it, and it's kind of like this Putin's government is more conservative in some ways, and some people don't like it, especially the youth. But that doesn't mean that it's something that people are out in the streets and protesting about, that because economics is everything, in my opinion. If you're economically okay, and if you are doing okay economically, and you can go and live your life and feed your families and have a roof over your head, sure, you may want to change these things, but you're going to do that through an electoral process, through a process of that isn't as hands-on in the streets. But why do you see all of these people in Europe protesting? Why do you see all of this pushback? It's because economics isn't fine in the EU. It's not fine in the West in general, in the United States especially. So you see more of as much of like a criticism there than here. And I don't think it's because Putin is shutting down every bit of criticism. I think it's because it's just most people are not compelled to feel that way.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I turned off my camera for a very simple reason. I've mentioned this to the chat before, and I'll tell you again. Unfortunately, I have kidney stones, and it takes a while to pass them. It takes like a month. And so, unfortunately, I have to change positions periodically. And so I have to move my camera around. I have a laptop on, and so it's just easier to turn off the camera. Sorry about that. But, it's my face. You're not missing much. So don't worry about it. But anyway, Joost, rather.
Yeah, but there's something I would like. Okay, go ahead.
No, well, I'm interested in what you have to say.
No, there are two themes here coming up, and there are. I'm not sure. I mean, you were saying, and I think you're right, that do they have the leadership, any connection with what the people think? And you're saying that in the West it's going less and less, in more or less. But on the other hand, something what Fiorella said. She said, "Is there any connection with your own history?" And those two things. I think the main problem at the moment in the Netherlands or other Western countries, and more so in the United States, is that people have no idea who they are, where they come from, where they're going to. They just live in the here and now, and they want to make up a kind of identity out of nothing, saying, "Oh, I'm transgender," or "I'm this or that," or making it up and making it a very big thing without. And that's also what I see when I talk to a lot of people. And if they're, maybe a bit more with younger people than older people, but I'm not sure. I think of the older people, you see the same thing. And in the Netherlands, it has always been a very internationalized country, because it's a little country, it's a rich country, and we make our money out of dealing with other countries and shipping things from here to there and making a lot of money out of it. I mean, that has been so for 400 or 500 years so, and it's still working okay. But the other hand is that we are losing in this time now more the connection with who we are and where we came from. And in that aspect, the farms are very interesting, but because when you do have a farm, your family has the farm, and the people before you have the farm, whole generations do have the same farm, and you have this feeling that the land you're living, it's not just something you make profit out of it, but it's also a feeling with a connection you have with the land. And I don't want to make it too sound too romantic, because it's also a business, but it is so. And it's also different with people living in the big streets, in the big city, and people living outside the city. They live there, and I saw some signs about it, that when you look at families living there, they're living there for ages. Sometimes they live in the same place for generation after generation for 400-500 years, and you don't expect you think we are somewhere living in out of nowhere, and we're moving away from everywhere, and it doesn't matter where you come from. And I don't know so much. I mean, I meet some Russian people, but I think in Russia, I'm not sure about young people, but I think in Russia, this whole feeling as being part of a whole community, of a whole society, is much stronger than it is in countries like the Netherlands at the moment. And I think the connection with the people who are in power is that they have the same thing, but even more stronger. That people in power, they live in the Netherlands, for example, they live in an international world. They don't have any connection.
They act more like conquerors. The leaders of the West act more like colonial powers, colonial administrators.
When there were colonial powers and there were conquerors, they know where they're fighting for. They know where they're connected with. But those people, they have no connection at all. They just don't care about the country where they live, and they don't care about. In a way, you're right. They care about having more power in that way, but that's an abstract thing. It's not about, and it's about an ideology. It's not about. It's not about people who are going to war for the country, because going to war is not a possibility anymore, because nobody in this country we're talking about, these Western countries, have any clue what they would have to fight for. So when you would ask anybody in the Netherlands, would you like to fight for the Netherlands? Well, not much. Would you like to fight for the EU? Even less. Yeah. So it's not. There's no real army anymore, and people don't want to die for the country. I mean, some did. I mean, I have to be honest that some did in Afghanistan, for example. People died there, but
almost for nothing, unfortunately.
Right, absolutely right. It's for America. It's not for the net. It had nothing to do with the Netherlands. I think that's the main I think this is also happening in Russia, because there is one reason why Putin is not going into a full mobilization. I think because he's afraid that not too many people want to die for this. And so,
do you think so, Fiorella? Do you think that that's part of the reason that he hasn't gone for full mobilization? Because in the West, all the analysts are talking about the fact that Putin has not gone for full mobilization. I have a theory of my own, but go ahead, Fiorella. I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people here didn't want to get involved in this. Even in spite of understanding why it was done, a lot of people just didn't want the economy to suffer. They didn't want any sort of pushback from the West. So some of the criticisms that have been launched at Putin have been for getting into this conflict because it did affect Russia, especially in the beginning. Now, obviously, it boomeranged, right? But a lot of people were afraid of, oh my God, like I'm not able to use this, I'm not able to use that. It's there was a lot of fear mongering too in listening to the West. A lot of people, oh, I'm leaving because this country is going to go down, blah, blah, blah. They let the fear sort of get to them. And so one of the criticisms on Putin from one side was, oh, we don't want to get involved because this is going to hurt our economy. It's going to ruin our country. We shouldn't do this. And also there's that sentiment towards Ukraine. A lot of people had family in Ukraine, et cetera. And then on the other end, of course, you have the people in the Donbass who were asking and criticizing Putin for not getting involved sooner. So now if Putin were to mobilize fully, I think he would get a lot of criticism from people who are like, okay, enough, like we got it. It's fine. They don't want to feel what Ukraine is feeling. They don't want to really go down for this. They don't see it as necessary as especially younger people that I've spoken to, because they don't see the West as big as a threat And I find that a little bit dangerous, a little bit, like, okay. But I also understand, because a lot of these people weren't alive even 20 years ago. I mean, this is like, we're talking about, the Cold War, and we're talking about the 90s. Some of these people are under 30. So they're not going to know very much at all. And so there's definitely a push for Putin to not go all the way and disrupt the life that Russians are living, because Russians really do enjoy like this community. They enjoy their families, very much family oriented population, unlike a lot of what we see in the West. I mean, in the United States, for example, as an immigrant, definitely, more several generations of people who live in the United States, right? They are less tied to their families, like coming from a Latin background. You focus more on family, you focus more on that community. I feel like a lot of that's been lost in a lot of Western countries, and Russia, for being a country in Eurasia, is extremely very much focused on family. And I find that that's a reason why people don't really want to get involved in this further. And I think that's where criticism against Putin could definitely come further if he continues in that route.
Yeah, because insofar as the military situation is concerned in Ukraine, the Russians really do not need any kind of full mobilization. With the army that they have deployed, which is really an expeditionary force, because they haven't really used the entirety of the Russian military, they're handling the situation very well on their own. They don't need to call up everybody. And on top of that, there's something else that people forget, is that when you do a generalized call up, it takes several weeks, if not months, to get everybody up to speed so that they can be effective in any kind of capacity, other than the most basic, law and order type, just have troops there to make sure that keep an eye on things kind of thing. In terms of combat or anything like that, you need months. And so the Russians are doing very well, and they're winning. They're at the point that they're going to overrun the Kramatorsk line, and after that, God knows where it'll go. But there's simply no way for the Ukraine, for the Zelensky regime, rather, to eke out of any kind of victory. It's impossible at this point. And so the issue becomes, how is this end game going to be played out? Will it be just the Zelensky regime against the Russian forces, or will NATO somehow get involved? But be that as it may, that's something that we'll have to take care of, discuss. Sorry, I got distracted here. But I'll mention why.
Gonzalo, I agree. I agree with you say here that they're doing fine and they are winning this war. I agree with that. But I think something in the world really changed. I mean, when I look at pictures from the First World War, I see all those hundreds of thousands of men running and being happy that they're going to the front and dying by the millions because of their country, because they feel that they're so. I mean, I'm not agreeing to that, because it's awful what happened there. And even with the Second World War, it was something like this, because they feel that they were connected and they have to die for something. But now everywhere in the world, and I think even in China will have a big problem with getting mobilization of all the Chinese people. And of course, we saw that already happening in the United States. The reason why the United States isn't as strong as it used to be is because they cannot get. They have to use technology and they send drones, etc., to win a war. But they cannot send soldiers anymore. I mean, not enough. And that's I think that's totally different than let's say 100 or 50 years ago.
Well, what's interesting is that everybody says NATO is so big and all the rest of it, but when you start actually looking at the combat troops that NATO can field,
it's
none
nothing.
of them. It's nothing.
No.
And what's very interesting is that early in the war, the Russians, when they fired on Yavoriv, the center that's basically a NATO training center in Ukraine, that was about about 25 miles from the border with Poland on the western end of of Ukraine, the Russians fired a barrage of hypersonic missiles at it early in the war. I think it was around like the 7th of March, I want to say, something like that. And they totally destroyed it. They killed something like 400 foreign fighters who were there, who were getting ready to be deployed, and who were clearly the advance force to bring in NATO troops. They also destroyed something like $400 million worth of weaponry. I mean, it was a complete disaster, and it was clearly a message that the Russians were sending. Basically, the message was, we can hit you anywhere we want to, whenever we want to, and you won't even see it coming and until it's too late, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah,
and
I
after
think it
that,
was at
NATO,
the same time that they were saying, well, maybe we can go nuclear if you like to.
Well, yeah, the West has been saying that. The West has been going insane.
No, but Putin had said something like this. When the NATO would do something, we can go nuclear. I think he said something like that.
Yeah, I know. He put it all on the line. He just said he's not going to screw around. But you know, this whole situation, what I keep returning to is the issue of leadership, and I'll explain why. Because at this time, I'm writing a book on Western leadership class and their failures, and why now it seems that our leadership class has driven our society into a ditch, the Western society, I mean. And that's why I'm obsessing about this. And if I keep on going on and on about the leadership classes, it's because I've got this on the brain, so you'll have to forgive me. But the thing I can't get over is how the leadership class, instead of pausing, taking a time to think it over, and making an intelligent decision in the best interests of the West, they just keep doubling down on bad policy after bad policy. And I want to ask you, Fiorella, you know, you've seen the hysteria of the Western leadership class, and I'm sure that the people you speak to in Russia are fairly sophisticated individuals. How do they view the Western leadership class when compared to their own leadership class? Because, for instance, I look at Sergei Lavrov, who is a statesman. Whatsoever you may think of him as a man, he knows what he's doing. He's a grown-up. He is handling things, and he knows how to build bridges, and he knows how to conduct diplomacy, whereas Anthony Blinken is an idiot. Liz Truss is a fool. Do people in Russia recognize this, or do they not pay attention to such granular detail?
It depends on who you're talking about. If you're talking about people in media or people that are well educated.
Yeah, more educated media people. What's their opinion? How do they see this as a failure of the Western leadership class, or do they think that this was an inevitability? How do they view this?
They view this as arrogance, as the United States trying to hold on to its title as this unilateral dictatorial entity. I mean, the United States goes around calling everybody dictators, right? But I mean, the United States has for a long time, admittedly. I mean, I forget, was it one of them just said, yes, we used to, I think it was Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, I forget which one, but we used to have this unilateral world, this position where we were the go-tos, that we would decide what was going on, and that's changed, and they lament it. They lament that it's changed, and so a lot of people that I speak to here see that as arrogance, as this attempt to hold on to power. You know, depending on if they're more anti-Western than others, they'll say that it's, you know, it's just a product of what the West has always been like, or how they just always acted, versus like, no, this is their attempt to continue exerting control, expanding this control over everybody else. And, you know, any sort of pushback is looked on as an attack instead of just pushback. You could look at China. You could look at China's response and Russia's response. For example, in the United States, when China didn't go and take Pelosi's plane down, a lot of Americans were like, well, that's weak, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, the United States has a tendency, and some of their people don't even realize that even that mindset of using a gun or using something militaristic right away is a very American way, always just going straight for that attack. Whereas the Chinese and the Russians are more methodical. It's like two different strategies in chess playing. You have the person that goes, puts their moves out in front and just goes and attacks the same way always. And then you have the person that's watching, sitting back, looking 5 moves ahead, and it's like, okay, we're going to do this. In China's case, we're going to go against them economically. We're going to go and attack them where it hurts right now. In Russia's case, well, we're not going to respond to these attacks with the most force, but we're going to do what we can to show that we're pushing back. So it's a different way of thinking. I agree. Sergei Lavrov compared to Anthony Blinken, right? You see it in the reactions that both had in Africa. When Anthony Blinken went to Africa, they felt like they were trying to boss these African countries around. Particularly South Africa spoke out about that. And then Sergei Lavrov went. They were like, "Thank you for working with us, for this cooperation, for this equitable relationship where you're not literally telling us what to do, because hey, we're an African country. We've had centuries of colonialism. That's the last thing we want." And the Soviet Union, of course, had a relationship with helping Africa decolonize. So it's this whole thing where the West just has this arrogance, and no matter how people feel about Putin, no matter how people feel about the United States, everybody does perceive, for the most part, that the West, the United States in particular, when we're talking about the West, is arrogant and they want things done their way.
Yeah, I mean the conceitedness. Yeah, and just to go back to this issue of the conceitedness, because I look at your prime minister and he seems incredibly conceited. And because what's interesting is that just like you were talking about, Fiorella, about Blinken and the U.S. State Department officials basically bossing the Africans around, in the Netherlands you have Rutte, who is basically bossing people around, and as I understand, he's basically refusing to negotiate with the farmers, or putting such conditions that no negotiation is really plausible. Is there an exit for this problem with in the Netherlands, or is it going to come to some sort of crisis point?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because we used to think about this Premier Rutte as not so much a leader but a manager, and I think that's leadership in the world today is management, basically, because they all go to the same schools and they learn how to deal with problems coming on the table, and management is a way to get out of conflicts. And a manager doesn't have a vision; he doesn't know where to go to. And I think that has always been the problem with Rutte, that he says it openly because he doesn't care. He didn't care about having a vision, having an idea. He never talks about it openly, what he wants with the Netherlands, or what's the problem, or who are we working with. It's just problems come at his table, and you think, how can we deal with it so that the powers that be will be the less trouble. And that's going on. But you're right. Now something new is going on, that he is not dealing with the problems anymore, because the problems, you could say, the problems now are the farmers, because they are demanding a change in policy. And so you normally in the Dutch society, where the so-called polder model, which is, you cannot translate it into English, because it's really the model of working together, as in the polder, the area where the people made land out of the sea. They have to work together, because otherwise you will drown in the water. So it's simple as that. So all the people have to work together. So, and we used to be pretty famous in the 90s and in the 80s for last century about our polder model. So we didn't have big strikes. But that's changing now, because the problems are getting too big. We want too much with too little a country. And the problems are getting bigger and bigger all the time. And you need a leader who knows where we have to go to. And we don't have that leader and at this moment.
Is there any such leader on the horizon in the Netherlands?
It's difficult. I see some people who I really think they are intelligent and have good ideas, but they are always representing a small group. And what you need is somebody who comes up and everybody agrees, okay, let's go for him. And that's not so much happening at the moment. So I cannot answer that. On the other hand, sometimes people you don't expect to will grow to be a real leader. That's possible. But at the moment, I don't see that happening.
Jesus Christ. Because, like, in the United States, at least, there is no person except perhaps Ron DeSantis, who seems like a next generation of leaders who actually cares about the people.
Yeah.
And so it's deeply troubling in the United States because the entire leadership class seems to be, like I said, detached from the people, and they don't care about the people, and they exploit the people. They look at the people as something to be milked and then sent to the slaughter, as the case may be.
But what in your opinion, what are good leaders? Give me some examples that say, okay, that's a good leader. That was a good leader.
Okay, a good leader in the abstract would be a leader who cares.
No, just a concrete person in history or something.
Teddy Roosevelt. That's an uncontroversial example, because if you pick anybody of the last 100 years, you're going to go into all kinds of, people are going to get all kinds of upset. But, Teddy Roosevelt, to give an example, he actually cared about the United States. He cared about the workers. He cared about the environment. He cared about making the United States a better country than it was. Okay. You do not see that in the last, 50 years. Well, perhaps you could say Ronald Reagan, because I do not doubt that he genuinely wanted a better country and that he wanted, morning in America and all that. I don't doubt his sincerity in that. I do question the people he had on board and the people backing him that seemed more, they seemed more, how can I put it, rapacious. I think that they were rather rapacious as opposed to, really trying to make a better country, though Reagan himself, but go ahead.
I think it just means, I think it depends on what you signify as a good leader, because, to me, like, a good leader should be leading people towards something better. And exactly. I don't see Reagan in that respect, just because aside from what you pointed out, like maybe his personal desires, what happened, of course, was a lot of issues in the United States because of Reagan politics. I think a lot of neoliberalism that we're living in now stems from that, in my opinion. And then also, Ron DeSantis, I think a lot of people felt like because of what he dealt with COVID, that he was okay. And like, I think his COVID policies in Florida were, one of the better ones in terms of not shutting down, in terms of not following the whole BS, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of just still playing party politics, I think he still plays that. I think he still plays this sort of team sports mentality between the left and the right and all of this. And I think he would be very much like Trump, if not more interventionist. And that's what I really look at. I look at a leader that isn't going to give us the same old status quo interventionist policies that end up putting us in the right where we were, right where we were. And I think I have more of a pessimistic view. I don't think there is anybody right now in the United States that is an effective leader. I think the closest thing that people could see, I think, is maybe somebody in the Libertarian Party. But even that, like, there's just so much just division. There's so much just so much like culture war BS hitting back and forth between the left and right, and like the economic issues get lost in that. The issues of anti-interventionism get lost in that. If we could agree, not just on ending the wars, on stopping interventionism, on focusing on rebuilding our infrastructure, on focusing on the American people, and also stopping our involvement abroad, and focusing on allowing, us having a free speech, a freedom of the press, basic rights that we had. I think people could unite around that, but there's just so many like divisions within each sector, whether it's the right or the left or whatever it calls itself, the left. It's just really bad. And I think a lot of that is by design, because the people are focused on each other instead of the global elitist just psychopaths that are trying to really send us down this route. And I think that's part of the huge problem, is if people sit down and talk, people with opposing ideologies, which is why I always talk to people who disagree with me on a lot of things, because I think in some ways, some of us are misinformed about the other. And, you know, I'm not saying go unite with the Azov battalion, but I am saying have conversations with people who may think differently than you, which is why I go on shows like this, where people are going to think differently than me. So I think that is really important, is to really highlight the fact that there's a lack of conversation, a lack of nuance. It's more of like, here's my side, here's my team, and that's it. And I'm going to hate you, and I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say.
You know, that thing of listening to other people, you know, setting up these roundtables, it takes a lot of effort in terms of booking. I mean, Fiorella, you'd be very familiar with that. You know, it's hard to book people, you know, because they're busy, and it's a little bit like wrangling cats. But the thing is, I recently made a concerted effort to reach out to people with whom I completely disagree on so far as different issues, especially the current conflict here in the Ukraine. Because I was hearing all kinds of things that just didn't correspond to reality as far as I understood it. And so I made a concerted effort to try to get people who had different viewpoints. And I told them, look, I'll be extremely civil. I will, you know, let you say whatever you want to say, just so long as you bring your facts and you have them in order. I mean, I didn't do it like a, you know, just I wanted to hear what they had to say. And I would, just as I'm talking to you both, I would give them as open a platform and as much space as they needed to formulate their points of view. And they all declined. They all ran away. They blocked me. Sometimes they deliberately sort of like picked fights, you know, like insulting me and trying to provoke me. And when, of course, I refused to be characterized as a propagandist or a whatever, I mean, all kinds of nasty comments. Then they automatically said, "Oh, see, that just shows that, you know, you're not in good faith." Of course, it was just provoking in order to create a reaction, so as to create the justification to not go on. It's, how can I put it? There seems to be a group of people who do not have facts on their side, who are living in some sort of fantasy land. And what Joost was saying before of how they try to create identities out of thin air, they try to create facts out of thin air. And of course, when somebody pushes back on them, they refuse to engage and instead call you names. And it's just, you know, it's just incredibly annoying. And by the way, while I'm talking to you, I'm unfortunately having to do moderation. I've got like a bunch of trolls that are like hitting my my chat, and it's just ridiculous because all they're trying to do is derail any kind of intelligent conversation. It's like something has happened that polarization is inevitable. And when you have polarization in a society, you inevitably wind up with some sort of civil war, quite frankly. I mean, that's
everybody is angry.
Yeah, you know, and that's the thing. Everybody's angry and mindlessly angry. That's the thing that I find troubling. They're just lashing out, and many times they don't even know the origins of their anger. They're just lashing out, you know, throwing it's extremely frustrating, especially because I was raised to believe that you ought to engage with your the people that disagree with you on politics or on any kind of policy, that you should engage with them and try to, if not compromise, then at least understand the other point of view. But now we are currently engaged in a society that does not care to listen to the other. They only want to shout to one another. It's deeply depressing because I don't think that this is going to have a happy ending. Sorry for rambling on, but you know that's
no. I totally agree with what you're saying, but and maybe then going back to the question of leadership, how can one be a leader of all those different angry people who are only shouting at each other? I mean, that's
your
problem. Yeah, but I was wondering, because I asked you the question, can you come up with a person? And I agree with Ronald Reagan. I really think he was kind of a father of the country at that moment. Also controversial, but controversial isn't the point. I mean, you are always controversial when you are a leader because you make choices. But I'm a bit surprised that that you didn't name Putin as a good leader, because I really think he is. He made a lot of mistakes, and he is controversial. But when you look at where Russia was at the moment when he came on, and where Russia is at the moment, it's an enormous difference.
Insofar as any contemporary leader, I'm holding off on any kind of judgment, because you can only really make a full judgment at the end of the day. And there's Fiorella. Yeah, you were like fading out. You were like just fading out into black. It was pretty funny. We do have to wind down, because I want to respect Fiorella's time. She does unfortunately have to go. And so before we go, do you guys have any final thoughts as to anything in particular, anything that you want to stress in this conversation that's been a little bit, all over the place, but as far as I'm concerned, a lot of times those are the most fun. If Fiorella or Joost, either one of you, if you have like a final thought or something that you want to emphasize before we go.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, no, just the fact that, I recommend people listen to viewpoints that are different than their own, obviously. And if you have a question about how something really is, if you can go to that country, talk to those people. This is one of the reasons why I came to Moscow, is because as much as I could assess that a lot of the things that were being told in the United States were false, it's different to be here and really live it, and really it exceeded the expectations as to how far away from what people think it is. It's so different than what people think it is, and if people are still, are you okay? Is like, we're worried about you, blah blah blah. They think like, I'm under some sort of like threat. It's hilarious that people think that, and so this is why I recommend people go to these places. If you are a journalist, if you're not, if you just want to visit, by all means, try to do that, to expand your horizons, to talk to different people. I really think it does open up your mind. And I agree. I mean, I don't agree with a lot of people in general, and I have a very different perspective than on certain things than say Gonzalo. But I will sit here and have a conversation, because on certain things we do agree, and I will talk about those things as well. So.
What do you think that we disagree about? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I think I'm more I'm politically left leaning, and you're not, right? So I think there's that element, and I still think it's okay. And it's funny, and I find it hilarious that we agree on this. The Western, interventionism. We agree that this conflict is definitely a NATO push. On the West. And I think people will sometimes on the left will function from ideology first, and same on the right. They'll function from ideology first. They won't talk to somebody if the ideology isn't shared. And I think we need to start talking about the truth first.
I mean, like in my own case, I actually didn't know that you were on the left, or you considered yourself to be politically at odds with me, because my priority has always been just, what are the facts? What's the accurate representation of reality? That's been always my concern. I don't really care about left, right. If you were to peg me on a political line from the extreme left to the extreme right, I would say that I'm hard right. I definitely think that the Bismarckian kind of social welfare system has been a detriment to the people, and that it should be removed, because it prevents people from developing close relationships with their family and their extended family, as had been tradition before the invention of the welfare state, which I think has brought about a state which replaces the family as the social group to give psychological and emotional support and financial support to people. I think that a state charity of any sort is bad for the people, because it's a short-term fix and it makes everybody feel better. But that's not important. What's important is that, you and I agree that the facts should come first. And we should strive to have accurate facts that accurately represent reality. and not live in any kind of fantasy land insofar as what is true or false. I mean, we can agree on that, right, Fiorella?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And what seems to me the problem is that the left, in particular, over the last 15 years, has become detached from reality. It's sort of like they only pay attention to the reality that they want. Sort of like the whole issue of like, oh, yeah, I was born with double X chromosomes, but today now I feel that I'm really a man, and so now I'm a man. I identified as male, but it's like you're distorting reality. You see my point, that people think that reality is an a la carte kind of menu that you can pick and choose what's real and what's not, and if it's not on the menu, you can just make it up. And reality doesn't work that way. It's you're crossing the street and you say to yourself, I choose not to accept the reality of that truck coming down the road. Well, if you cross the street and pretend that the truck isn't there, the truck is going to kill you, whether you believe in it or not. And so my thinking is we should pay attention to reality and strive to have reality and facts above everything else, and only then come to discussions as to how to best solve certain social problems that are commonly shared. And that seems to be my opinion. That is my opinion. And that seems to me to be the logical way to solve problems of a society. But to me, and I'm not referring to you, Fiorella, I'm just generally, it seems that the left, they ditched facts and reality. That seems to be what I perceive. Do you agree with this, or you think that there's something else going on?
I think the perception of what is left in the United States isn't a good representation of what the left is in other places, places in Africa, places in West Asia, in Latin America. It's more focused on economics, less on social positions, like social issues. The left in certain countries that I've been to are economically focused on empowering the people, the workers, versus like abortion rights or something like that. And so that's considered left in those countries. Whereas what's left in the United States is, do you support pronouns? Do you support trans rights? I mean, I'm pretty like open. I don't care who people choose to love, how people choose to call themselves. What I don't like is the hyper focusing on that as a handicap to push the same type of imperialism, the same type of neoliberal economic policies. And I think that's what's my issue is with the quote unquote left in the United States, is that they use those issues as crutches to completely ignore economics. And that's driven, of course, by the national security state apparatus, by the covert agencies, because they know that if they hire the intersectional imperialists, which is what we have in the United States right now, we have Kamala Harris, we have what's his name, Secretary of Defense, we have
Lloyd Austin.
Yes, Lloyd Austin. We have also the House, the Speaker, the Joe Biden's press secretary. We have all of these people that are, of course, intersectional, and I think to a degree that did matter. But then you have, that is what has allowed the identity politics without any sort of actual substance, tangible work towards actually helping people, is what my problem is. The weaponization of the Latino population, of the Black population for votes without actually doing anything to help people. I think that is what really gets to me. And I think that's where I don't see that as a real left. I see that as just like another neoliberal co-opted agenda. And I think that those people are what make the right, have these very negative views about, things like socialism. I think that's where that's coming from, but that's not what it all is. I think there's just a lot of people that are more focused on economics in other parts of the world that are actually conservative on social issues too. So I think there's room to have these discussions with those people and to really see that are different layers and different aspects that go beyond the usual left-right paradigm, the usual pro-trans, anti-trans. There's just all of these things happening that are a distraction. And I think it's a very privileged position that the West has when they focus on these social issues, when other people are focused on having a roof over their head, having water, having electricity, having things that really cement their economic status. The idea even of feminism in the United States is completely different in other parts of the world. Feminism doesn't mean, a slogan or voting for Hillary Clinton. It means
hating men.
going to school. It doesn't mean hating men. It means, having some sort of equitable, just monetary existence to a degree. It doesn't mean what it means to everybody in the United States. So I think there's room to discuss, what does it mean? What is left? What is this? What is that? And I just think, like, on both ends, people just make up these ideas about what somebody on the left is, what somebody on the right is. And I think that's changing. I definitely think that's changing because of the state of where we're at. So yeah, I'm glad to discuss, and I would discuss with anybody, like, again. So.
All right, and a final question out of curiosity, and feel free if you don't want to answer. How long do you intend to stay in Moscow?
I'm not sure. I mean, I will be here for at least a year, and then we'll see about that. It's been great so far. I am trying to learn Russian, so I'm going to start taking classes, because that's, for me, the hardest thing besides the sanctions stuff is not knowing Russian. And it's a completely different alphabet. It's different. So it's not like I can just, like, pick it up. It's not a Romance language. It's not a Germanic language. I know some German. So it's not that. So it's different. So I think that's the hardest part. So we'll see. It'll be at least a year. So I'll be here for a little bit still.
Cool. Very cool. Joost, what was your final thought? Because we got sort of like, not derailed. It was a very interesting conversation with Fiorella. But Joost, what are your final thoughts before we get going?
Well, it seems like going on this topic about left and right. I'm getting more and more confused about what all this actually means.
I agree.
I just can give you two examples which are surprised me. I have a friend who is from Morocco, and he calls himself left, and he said, of course, all the left people hate the Islam. And I said, okay, that's interesting, because in the Netherlands, all the left people agree with the Islam, even when the Islam is a conservative ideology. So you see how difficult these things get, because there are multicultural ideals, and they say Islam is part of this, so going against the Islam is racist or something like that. This is one example. Okay. The other example is globalism. Left people used to be anti-globalist. In the 90s, there was a big anti-globalist movement, which was a left movement. And then suddenly, this all went away. And when you're anti-globalist now, you are a right-wing. And it does say that what I would call myself left, by the way, because I have a different opinion about economy than you do, Gonzalo. I really think that the state has an important function for poor people, helping them, and I would say that's old-fashioned left. But I think most populist people are in fact left-wing people, but they are called now extreme right. So you can only laugh at that because it doesn't mean anything.
I'm not laughing at you. Please.
No. But people laugh at that. When I would call myself left, people they laugh at me because they say, "Yeah, but of course you are extreme right wing and blah blah blah." But that says a lot about the meaning of. I mean, it's all about values. It's about caring for people who don't have it good, and see that you can happen. Okay, it's possible that you do this in a more family-like way, caring for the people who are next to you, because that's maybe more effective. But also, a state can do a lot of things about it, and I think in that aspect, but on the other hand, I'm very nationalistic, so that would maybe other people call right wing at the same time.
Well, is that what I do have to point out that you in the Netherlands are exceptionally lucky because your state, I live there, so I know they are very efficient. They take care of things. The bureaucracy is very organized. I had to do different bureaucratic tasks, the usual things when you live in a country, and
Yeah.
everything was so organized, so orderly, so efficient. Everything worked, from public works to everything. I remember specifically, I was living in Amsterdam. I remember I was on crutches because I broke one of my feet, and I was walking on it, and I pushed down a brick on one of the bridges I had to go over, and right by my house, and I noticed it, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was on crutches, and I kept on going, and I noticed that 2 days later they had come and fixed it, and it was perfect. It was perfectly
Okay.
new,
Yeah.
by magic, and it was a tiny little thing that had happened there. I've seen up close and personal how efficient the Dutch state is, but the problem is that that's unique. Most other states are a complete disaster, and I personally think that a distributist model would be more efficient, but that's for another conversation. I'm very
Yeah.
aware that
Okay.
Fiorella has to go, and so I'm going to wind it down. I want to thank you both for having come over. Once again, Chad, I'm sorry that I'm not on camera, but I'm basically lying on my side so as to ease the the unpleasantness of this kidney stone. But I want to thank both of my guests for having come on, Joost, Niemoller, and Fiorella, Isabel. I'll put the links where you can find them below. That's something I forgot to ask you guys. And after the show, I'll ask you to send me your the links that you want in the description where people can find you. And chat, thank you so much. And I will catch you next time. Take care.
All right.